Hello, I'm Mitch Fox, president of the Nevada Broadcasters Association, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Nevada on the Air, a program that highlights the leaders and innovators and influencers who are making a big difference in communities throughout Nevada. I'm excited to have one of the state's most influential political commentators on the podcast today. Steve Sibelius oversees the Review Journal's Washington and Carson City bureaus, as well as the reporting team covering local politics in Clark County. Also writes a political column in the Sunday Viewpoint section, and he's been an on-air political analyst for KLAS TV Channel 8 for 10 years. That's what your bio says. It seems like longer than that.
Yes, it was 10 years, 2010 to 2020.
10 years, and one of the best guests on Nevada Week in Review, and actually a host of Nevada Week in Review as well.
Yes, absolutely. Guest host many a time.
Yeah, welcome, Steve.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We got so much to cover in a short period of time, so why don't we just start looking at the races.
Sure.
And just start at the top. You hosted a debate between the GOP candidates for governor at KLAS TV Channel 8. That was quite a show, actually. What was your assessment as to, well, first of all, how did they do? How did they come across?
Yeah, I think they did pretty well, all things considered. There were certain questions that, I thought there would be big reactions to, and that was true. The immigration issue is one that's a hot button issue, and that several of Joe Lombardo's challengers have really criticized him for. And he has a very nuanced position on that issue, and so it's tough to kind of explain that within the debate format. We have a minute to answer a question and 30 seconds for follow-up. So, but I thought overall they all did fairly well, answering some pretty tough questions.
Now, Lombardo got the Trump endorsement.
Yes.
It appeared as though he wasn't actively seeking it, but he did get that. And how much of an advantage do you think that gives him in the primary? I
think it gives him an advantage in the sense that it kind of mutes some of the criticism that he had from the base, because he had said a long time ago, look, I'm not going to seek the endorsement, but I will accept it. If he agrees with me and agrees with my policies, then I'll take his endorsement, which it looks like that's what happened. Joe Lombardo didn't make any feints towards Donald Trump. He didn't say the election was stolen. He didn't praise Trump as a leader, as some of the other candidates did. Some of the other candidates were just openly courting the Trump endorsement. And Lombardo didn't do that. And so I think that gives him a little bit of an advantage, because now, people in the Trump base can say, well, we don't trust Lombardo. Well, you can't say that anymore. Donald Trump has endorsed him himself. Now, that apparently didn't matter to the Republican Party, because they endorsed Joey Gilbert, which was a kind of a surprise, because the party, the activists in the party are supposedly the Trump base, but they went ahead and endorsed somebody else and differed with the president on that. So I thought that was interesting.
It seems like this election is probably going to be full of surprises, more so than prior election cycles. And I'm not going to ask you to go out on a limb on some of these, but maybe as you're looking at this governor's race, the presumptive favorite tends to be the one like the sheriff who's gotten the endorsement of Trump, but anything's possible, I guess, in that race.
Yeah, anything is possible. Joe Lombardo said at the end of the debate, he went last in closing statements, and he took advantage of that by saying, look, what are we even talking about here? This primary is over. I'm going to win. What are we even arguing about? which some people thought, oh, well, that was kind of an interesting approach. But I don't think he was entirely wrong. I mean, I think he's way ahead in the polls. I think he's way ahead in fundraising, as he pointed out. With the Trump endorsement, I think he's going to get some Trump people who are on the fence. So I think he's going to do well. And I don't know if we'll see a surprise. Joey Gilbert's done very well. He's got a lot of people in the base who support him. But I think I would be surprised, if he won the primary there.
Let's talk about Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. She doesn't really have a race on her side.
Yeah,
but
she will win her primary. I'll go out on a limb on that.
It's a bold prediction, right? But on the Republican side, it does seem like there is a contest. Explain the dynamics of that.
Yeah, on the Republican side, there is a fight, and we didn't necessarily think there would be. You have Adam Laxalt, who ran and won. He was Attorney General from 2014 to 2018. He ran for governor. He lost that seat, and he's still around now. He's running for U.S. Senate against Catherine Cortez Masto. And he was sort of cruising to that victory until he got a challenge from Sam Brown that nobody really saw coming. And when Sam Brown posted those fundraising numbers, $1 million in a quarter, people were very surprised because they didn't think that this guy was a newcomer. He's run once before. He ran in Texas, could pull it off, and yet he's been competitive. He had a very competitive debate with Adam Laxalt on Sam Shad's Nevada Newsmakers. It was a feisty, spirited debate between those two, and he made some good points in there. So now, will he win? I don't know. I think Laxalt is still the favorite in that race, but Laxalt, I think, is even surprised at the strength of that challenge, to the point where he's doing oppo ads on Sam Brown, which you wouldn't think he wouldn't have to do, and Catherine Cortez Masto does not have to do. So she's saving her money now in the primary to go to war immediately on June 15th, as soon as the primary is over.
Let's talk about Congressional District number 1. Of course, we know these districts got redrawn.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, some of these districts that weren't competitive, now they are competitive. Probably the biggest example would be Congresswoman Dina Titus's district for the general. But even in the primary, she's got a primary battle on her hands. Yeah,
and we always used to joke Dina Titus could never lose the race. I mean, she would win that every single time. And when they did the redistricting, she was very unhappy. I can't even quote what she said here because it's not safe for broadcasting. But she was very unhappy because her district became, she got a lot more Republicans. She got Boulder City, she got Henderson and Anthem and those areas, and she was not happy about that. The only glimmer of hope for her, I think, would have been that her primary challenge from Amy Villela, who's a progressive, she's run for Congress before in the 4th District, she tries to position herself to Dina Titus's left. And if that district that was once very safe for Dina Titus has morphed to where Dina Titus is looking down the road at the primary, or the general, thinking I'm going to have some trouble in the general, it certainly can't help Amy Villela in the primary. If it gets more conservative, it gets worse for Amy Villela in that primary. So I don't think, I think the progressive wing of the party may support her, but Dina Titus is a progressive herself. She was the first person in the delegation, and I think probably still the only one to come out for Medicare for All, which is Amy Villela's big issue. She's lines up on almost all of those progressive issues. So I don't know, other than personality, why you would replace a progressive like Dina Titus with a different progressive. But there are people in the party who want to do that, and there'll be a slight factor in there. I still think Dina Titus is the favorite for that. She takes every race seriously. She's paranoid. Somebody who has absolutely no chance. If they file against her, she is going to take that person seriously, and she has in the past. So I think that'll be a good race. But I think her big worry is going to be more in the general than in the primary.
She's got so much seniority. She's got some good committee assignments and some leadership roles. And,
yes, absolutely.
She has good relationships with leadership. Now, who knows if Congress is going to go, Republican or Democrat? Yeah. but she does have that.
There is that. She could be in the minority in Congress come November. In fact, the likelihood perhaps is that that's going to happen. But the thing about that is the argument that, for example, in 2010. When Harry Reid was up, and you had Republicans for Reid formed by Sig Rogich, who's a Republican. He understood how politics worked. He'd worked in Washington, he'd worked in the White House. He knew that having a majority leader from a tiny state was an incredible advantage, and why would you give that up? But for base voters, for people who are like the Bernie Sanders supporters, Our Revolution, those type of folks, this argument about seniority and behind the scenes ability to get things done, that doesn't really do it. They want somebody who's going to champion their issues, regardless of how effective they are in actually getting things done. They want somebody who's going to champion those issues. And so that argument doesn't necessarily work with the base voters. But for anybody who knows anything about how politics actually works and who practices in politics, that is going to be a very powerful argument. Somebody who has her seniority, assuming that they keep the House, which I think is kind of doubtful, is somebody you want to keep around.
Let's talk about, I believe it's Congressional District number 2. There is a primary battle going on there.
Who would have thought that either?
Talk to us about that. Who are the candidates in that race?
Mark Amodei and Dina Titus could have gone on vacation, 2 years ago together before the whole thing and just relaxed in Greece or wherever. But this time, Mark Amodei actually has a primary against Danny Tarkanian, who's a familiar name to folks down here in Southern Nevada, having been on various ballots for various offices 6 times and losing all of them. He finally went up to Douglas County. He won a county commission seat there by 17 votes in 2020 and immediately started running for Congress because that's what Danny Tarkanian really wants to do. He'll tell you that if you ask him. And I did. I asked him once, why don't you run for city council? Your mom's on the city council. The Tarkanian name is so well known. It's a small district. You could win. And he told me, no, the problems that the country is really bedeviled by are in Washington, and that's where I have to be. So that's where he's been trying to get for a long time. Now, this is going to be somewhat historic. This will mark, he will have run in 3 of the 4 congressional districts in Nevada. So he's already got that footnote in the history books. But I think Mark Amodei, who's a pretty wily guy, I think is probably going to win that primary. And they had a debate on Sam Shad's Nevada Newsmakers, and it didn't go quite as well for Tarkanian as I think he hoped.
Let's talk a little bit about the legislature, because you wrote a column about how much we're going to lose with all of term limits coming into and retirements and resignations, and this institutional knowledge, how the process works, is so important because these folks come from various backgrounds and jobs, and then they're thrust into this 90-day, 120-day, however it ends up in Carson City, and so much is riding on their knowledge and experience, so forth. So how important, legislative contests are really important this year, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to see the loss of between 184 and 186 years of legislative experience, which is a lot of legislative experience. Now, some of it is for people who were only up there a very short time. Annie Black was there for 2 years, and she was distinguished mostly by being thrown off the floor because she wouldn't wear the face mask during the COVID crisis and getting into fights with lawmakers. But you're also losing people such as Jason Frierson, who was the Speaker of the Assembly and who's now U.S. Attorney.
Very admired.
Very admired, very respected person, and who I can tell you from having been up there ran the Assembly very, very well. Was able to process bills very, very quickly, which at the end of a session is very important. You're seeing the loss of someone such as Maggie Carlton, who was chairwoman of Ways and Means. She was the longest serving, it actually is, because we haven't had the election yet, she is the longest serving female lawmaker in the state's history. She did 12 years in the state Senate, 12 years in the Assembly, and knows the budget better than anybody else. Those 24 years are walking out the door when she leaves. You really can't replace that. You can't replace that. Lawmakers will tell you, it took me 2 sessions or 3 sessions before I really knew how things got put together, before I really knew what committee did what and what I wanted to do and how to get it done. Knew which lobbyist I could trust, which lobbyist I couldn't trust. All of those things out the door with these longtime lawmakers. Now the voters have approved term limits, and they don't seem to be in any mood to change that. And so I think we're going to continue to see that as we have citizen lawmakers going forward. But it is a loss, and it makes it more difficult in subsequent sessions. New lawmakers are more at the mercy of the LCB, the institutional staff there, and the lobbyists who are up there, and they have no term limits for lobbyists. There have been lobbyists who have been up there for 40 years and know the process better than any of the lawmakers, even better than some of the LCB people, and know how to get things done. And as the great Jeff Dornan of the Nevada Appeal once put it, this process is designed to kill bills, not pass bills, and they know how to do that very well.
Let's talk about this notion of open primary, because that could be a possibility here in the state of Nevada. There's several states that have adopted that. Some call it the jungle primary or whatever. What do you think about that here in Nevada?
Yeah, I think right now people are getting their mail ballots, and there are certain color pages for Democrats and there's certain color pages for Republicans. I think it's blue for Democrats, yellow for Republicans, and then you have these little pages in the back that are white, and there's like 5 or 6 races. And the nonpartisan people, that's all they get to do, those 5 or 6 races. They have no say in Assembly, Governor, Senate, Congress, anything, because they're all partisan primaries. And in this state, you have to be a Democrat to cast a Democratic ballot. Now, there's an argument to be made that if you want to influence the process, if you want to be part of that organization, you can join up. You can do it online. It's very easy to do it. I have a friend who was nonpartisan, switched to Republican so he could vote in the primary. It's possible to be done. But there are other people who say, well, why should nonpartisans be excluded from making those decisions early on? Because by the time they get to the table, the party base may have nominated somebody that they find completely unacceptable, whereas they would have supported somebody who would maybe more moderate. That moderating influence, I think, is why a lot of people support that kind of a primary, because you have to appeal to everybody from the start. Because now, you and I have covered politics for many, many years. We know how it goes. The left goes to the left during the primary, the right goes to the right, and then they all come back to the center in time for the general. They couldn't do that with an open primary. You'd have to appeal to everybody from the start, and I think you might get a more honest brand of politician from the start. There's some arguments against it. It's confusing. People who are not Republicans, vote in Democratic primaries and all that. I don't put much stock in some of those arguments. My dad, for example, was a rock rib Republican, sort of an Eisenhower Republican his whole life, but he was a registered Democrat because he wanted to vote for the worst Democratic candidate he possibly could.
He was ahead of his time.
He was very much ahead of his time, and he claimed, based on the voter turnout statistics, that he was not alone in doing that other people were doing the same thing. So this would be a version of that, only you wouldn't have to sign up for the wrong thing. You could just do it honestly from the start.
So we'll see what happens. Steve, thank you for joining us. We're going to have you back before the general election.
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.